is the man after God's own heart, and Saul died in disgrace. But it was all about their reaction after the fact. But David sends for this woman. They tell him who she is, and he has them bring her to him anyway, where they do have an affair. And the thing about sin is it doesn't easily go away. You can do what you can to hide it, as David tries to do shortly. But it doesn't go away because this is a fling. It's over. Uriah will never have to find out about this. And then David gets word from Bathsheba that she's conceived a child. So then there's multiple exits here. David could have owned up to it. But no, he begins to devise a plan to cover up his sin. He begins to think, well, if I have Uriah come home, then he can give me a report on the battlefield, and then he'll go into his house and everything will be okay because Uriah will believe that the child is his because he got to go home for one night. And that sounds like a great plan. So he sends to Joab and he sends for Uriah, and he comes in and he gives him a report. And in one commentary I read, it said that Uriah knew what David had done. And that's why he refused to go to his house. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. There's that phrase again. But I've just got to tell you that as I read the Bible, I don't see that. I think that's drawing. Maybe he did, but that's not what I read as I'm reading the Bible. But I do wonder, after Uriah is being sent to his house to go into his wife, and in verse number 8, the end of the verse, it says, "And there followed him a mess of meat from the king." Now, that sounds to me like a southerner wrote that verse, but because I'm not exactly sure how much a mess is, but I've heard the phrase a lot in my lifetime. But a mess of meat follows him. So David is trying to butter him up. He's trying to make sure his time home is enjoyable. I'm sure this is out of a guilty conscience because this is eating away at David. Did you know that's what sin does to you? Is it eats away at you? Yeah. Because Satan tempts you, but he doesn't let go of that sin. Once you've committed that sin, he just keeps reminding you about it. And he keeps reminding you about it. And he keeps reminding you about it. And until there's an explosion, and that's what eventually happens here. But we're supposed to confess those things one to another. We're supposed to seek forgiveness. We're supposed to move on from that because that eating away at David is what causes him to take the next step. But we find Uriah, he doesn't go home. And again, in my mind, I try to put myself in Bible stories just to try to understand what's going on. I do not understand Uriah, who's been away at battle. He's, I'm sure, missing his wife, and he has the chance to come home. He sees the king, and they've prepared a feast for him and his wife at his house, apparently, because of the mess of meat. But he will not go home, and he sleeps at the king's door. And David, the next day, he finds out about this, and he calls for Uriah again. He says, "What is wrong with you? You're home. Go enjoy your bed. Go spend time with your wife. Go do all these things." But Uriah, being a nobleman, says, "How can I go in and enjoy the luxuries of being home while my lord Joab is still on the battlefield and the men of the armies of Judah and Israel are on the battlefield? How shall I enjoy these things while they're sleeping in their tents?" So then the next step in David's sin is he's still trying to cover it up. And politically, you hear the phrase from time to time, the cover-up was worse than the sin, and that's what we're starting to see. Because David's plan now is he's like, okay, this man is too noble. He's thinking too logically. I've got an idea. Let's get him liquored up. So they have a party in the king's palace, and Uriah gets all the alcohol he wants, and David then sends him home thinking he's not of a sound mind now. He'll go home. He'll lay with his wife. Everything is fine. Until the next day, David finds out again that Uriah would not go to his house. So now David all of his plans to cover up his sin have failed. So then he devises one more plan. And again, I don't like beating up on David, but what he does next makes absolutely no sense to me. How someone could do that. He sends letters to Joab by the hand of Uriah. It says, find the hottest battle going. Put Uriah on the front line. Go and retreat. And he puts that letter sealed in Uriah's hand and has Uriah deliver his own death warrant. See, there are multiple steps there. Multiple exits where David could have gotten off the sin interstate and went and confessed what he had done, but that's not what he did. And Joab, being the loyal general, does exactly what David told him. In verse 17, we didn't read it, but I do want to read it. Actually, let's back up to 16. And it came to pass, when Joab observed the city, that he assigned Uriah unto a place where he knew that valiant men were. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and there fell some of the people of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. So, right here we find not only David's next sin, but the next consequence to the sin. Because the first one was what he tried to cover up, and that was the child. If I can back up for a moment, the one thing that I've never understood about abortion is everything that people do has consequences, good or bad. For a student in school, if you study, the consequences might just be that you get good grades. And if you drink and drive, you run the risk of getting in a car accident, killing someone, or at the very minimum, getting a DUI ticket. Everything you do has consequences. And when it comes to being intimate and in those moments, whenever you are intimate, you do risk the chance of conceiving a child. And when it comes to abortion, that's a risk that you already took. And it's not the baby's fault because the baby had nothing to do with it. And my question about abortion will always be, is it a life? And in the Bible we find where in Jeremiah that God knew Jeremiah while he was in the womb. The first person to recognize our Savior on earth was in the womb. It was John the Baptist, who leapt in his mother's womb whenever Mary came to see Elizabeth while she was expecting Jesus. So, the Bible evidence tells me that it is a life. And then, if I look at it scientifically, I don't understand if a heartbeat in my body is a sign of life. Then why wouldn't a heartbeat in I'll use the term, fetus's body be alive? If my DNA tells exactly who I am, then why does fetus have a separate DNA from his mother, but yet it's not alive? Now, I'm very thankful that our Supreme Court made the ruling that they did, which didn't ban abortion. It sent it back to the states, and we happen to live in a state that is pro-life, where here in a few short days, or I want to say it's August the 23rd, I don't remember for sure, our trigger law takes effect, which bans abortions after there's a heartbeat. But in many states, that's not the case. In Kansas yesterday, they had on their ballot an amendment to their constitution, which would allow them to say that abortion goes against the state's constitution, and it was voted down. The state of, according to some polling, the state of Vermont is the only state in the union that believes that we should allow abortion up until the point of birth. state of Virginia, the governor, the previous governor, I should say, talked about how, in his opinion, that if a mother begins to change her mind after the baby is born, they should lay the baby to the side, make sure they're comfortable, both they and the mother, and then the doctor and the mother make a decision on what to do with the child. My mind does not comprehend that at all.
No.
Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But that is not. But there's so many people in the wicked world we live in, and that's how they believe. And the baby had nothing at all to do with it, and that'll come into play here shortly. But the next consequence after the child was in verse 17. It says, "And there fell some of the people of the servants of David." So Uriah wasn't the only one that died. The Bible doesn't say how many, but however many people it was, however many people died, it was all to cover up the sin of David. In chapter number 12, we find, in my opinion, a pretty interesting story. A man that really has courage, and he comes to David, who, can I remind you, David just